Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Nerio Rivera. I'm with IMSM. I'm the area manager here in the Metro New York City area, and thank you for attending our ISO 27001 Information Security Management System Standards and how they apply to you. And I apologize for technical difficulties. I meant for you to actually be able to see me and my partners here, but unfortunately, there are camera issues. And also joining us will be our two partners here, Patricia Maricola from Maricola Elite and Marty Gator from Uncommon Business and Solutions, who will be joining us to contribute some really interesting information. So want to kind of go through this. Let's see, moving on. Here's our agenda. We'll try to go through this pretty quickly, not to take up too much of your day here. Just going to review basically what 27001 is, some of the challenges behind that and costs, and then we'll hear from our partners about some real life situations, and then just what we can do to address those things. This will be recorded, so it will be made available later through IMSM and also our partners. Let's see here. So ISO 27001, what is it? As you can see, it's been around since 2005, but the standard itself has evolved along with technology and was revised in 2013 to identify some additional risk mitigation procedures. So 27001 is going to take the whole company into account, from everything from management to employees and even their contractors. Okay. And here was a survey that was conducted. And as you can see, it really just highlights the fact that many business leaders have been in denial about the risk of cyber attacks in their organization. And which is, of course, going to make it easier for those bad actors to take advantage, especially if 66% believe that a cyber attack is unlikely. And we'll get a little bit more into how common it is later. This is just highlighting some further evidence of security not being a priority and confusion even as to whose responsibility it even is to safeguard company data. So, 9% believing that it's individuals, and then 62% believing it's just the top at management, CEOs. I mean, there's definitely some confusion here, which again contributes to the risk behind it. And so, when people think of some of the outside threats, people normally think of some of these examples. And of course, they think of the typical hacker. There's the one picture there. There's always the guy with the black hooded sweatshirt in the dark room, which I'm sure is true in some situations. But as you can see here, the biggest threat isn't necessarily just from hackers, which is a threat, but also from internally from your employees. So a company's Achilles heel really is its people. People can make mistakes, especially without any direction. It's going to be easy not to know what to do when they get something that's a little fishy. So really over 90% of breaches are caused through employees. So definitely something to consider. So small businesses are gateways into larger companies. And for example, if you're a third-party vendor, let's say for a much larger company, you can be used to extract information necessary to infiltrate that larger company. And on top of that, if you're a smaller organization, you could be dealing with an experienced hacker network and with limited resources on your side. Okay, and now here's the scary part. When you look at the numbers behind it, I mean, $6 trillion annually by 2021 in predicted cybercrime. It's quite a number. I mean, there are countries that don't hit that, in terms of their GDPs. It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, there's no question at this point whether cybersecurity is important. Even government officials, federal government officials here in the U.S. Say that it's not a matter of if it'll affect you as a small business, it's more a matter of when. So this is something they understand very well. Okay, and with that, I want to pass the ball over to Marty from USPS to take us into some of his war stories, or rather, wear stories. So go ahead, Marty.
All right, thanks a lot, Nerio. It's interesting. We've talked about this prior to everybody jumping on. Thanks for being on with us this morning. It's really more of a matter of just being prepared and educated prior to. A lot of times, the small business owners that I've worked with tend to not think about these things until it happens. So I spend a lot of my time educating, making sure people understand the situation before it happens. So I start off by once again redefining what ransomware is. It just really is just a matter of a malicious attack. It's just a software attack that blocks access to your system. And ideally, it's something very simply done. It just happens. It just, so most of the time you don't even know it's going to be there. Now, usually it comes with a fee attached. Why they attack medium to small businesses? Because you can't operate unless you get this taken care of. The major corporations, they can figure a way with backups, whatever the case, or they don't think too much about it. But the mediums and smalls, they're the ones that are medium to large businesses. They're the ones that can't operate. So they're going to pay. And if you think about it from a standpoint of who are you going to get help from? Who do you call? Well, local government on an average, they're 30% overstaffed or understaffed, excuse me. So they don't have the manpower to actually help you. And on a federal level, I said 300 versus 3. I always think about movies when I try to use examples, either 300. It's really, you've got 100 hackers for every one person on defense. So for every 100 people that are trying to create or make ransomware to get into a system, you have one person federally trying to figure a way out of the situation. So if you're not being preemptive by finding a solution on your own, you're really just a sitting duck waiting for something to happen. And I asked the question about, should it be illegal to pay a ransom? Because literally at this point, what I've seen from the medium to large, small to medium sized businesses, they're paying these ransoms, and these hackers that are using ransomware, it's almost like R&D for them. They're just like getting the money for research and development to find a new way to do it. There is talk that they're looking at some legislation to figure a way to make it illegal. The Colonial Pipeline, they paid $4.4 million in Bitcoin to unlock the files, and the CEO Joseph Blunt, he said he was uncomfortable. He was comfortable seeing the money go out the door rather than seeing his pipeline all backed up. But that does not help in the long run. So if you look at the graph is something I want you to talk about. Go back to that graph for a second here. The graph itself is important because it talks about the previous slide before we go to that. The previous slide was the hack. Before I give you examples, from 2006 to 2020, the U.S. has had 156 significant cyber attacks, which is more than the UK, India, and Germany combined. So just think about that for a second. We're outpacing some of the most progressive technical companies. Thank you very much. That graph there just shows where we're going. It's not going away. It's not a problem that's leaving. It's still around, and the U.S. is outpacing. Okay, so I'm sorry. Next slide. So what are some common examples? I like to use just some things that have happened just in, I guess, some of the things we've seen just around us. I use the Colonial Pipeline because it's topical. I don't know how many listeners we have on right now that are on the East Coast, but you got hit with this. What happened in the Colonial Pipeline? Literally shut down. They did what was called a 0-day attack. And this was actually something that was brought on by just the the company called Bitfighter. What they did, Bitdefender, they bragged about how great their defense was, and it actually challenged the hackers to get in there and actually make this hack happen and shut down the Colonial Pipeline. So by putting this out there and saying how great things were, they still got in through ransomware. You're using actually cellular devices, which I tell people are sometimes, to Nerio's earlier point about employees, smart devices are some of the problem that come in, shut down the pipeline, and they end up having to pay to get things going back up and running. So literally, you don't know where it's going to come from. You can talk about how great things are. It's just a matter of time if you don't have your own solution. I said the $1.3 million interview, if anybody remembers the movie, The Interview, Sony Pictures was hacked because North Korea didn't like what the content was going to be. The whole business of these people that do ransomware, it is a very big business for them. The hackers themselves know the going rate for creating these, what they're called zero-day attacks, what I have here on the slide, $2.5 million is the going rate for creating these zero-day attacks. And what the zero-day attack is it's a way that the code will get in there and it'll do the most damage on that first day before they can get in there and figure out anything to do to combat it, to change it, to stop it. Now, the sad thing about this is, one, okay, our government, state or federal, isn't going to pay as much as $2.5 million to do coding. So obviously, from a lucrative standpoint, where do you think a hacker is going to go? Obviously, they're going to go to the dark side. Two, the sad thing about this, we started this. The U.S. was really the very first ones when it comes to operations against foreign countries. We did it with Iran back with Stuxnet. We sped up their centrifuges in Iran because we weren't happy about the way they were doing the nuclear program. So we entered into code, did some malware, did that, sped up their centrifuges, and destroyed some reactors. And once that got out, now we're the number one target. So we still use this zero-day attack for operations against foreign countries that we don't like. But now it comes to us, and the number one people that are hit are business, because we're a capitalistic country. So where do you think they go? They want to hit the infrastructure. So to Nerio's point earlier, I think it's really important to think it's not a matter of if or when. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Going back to the point again with smart devices, I said they make us dumb. It makes security really dumb because you just don't know what apps people are downloading. You don't know where these apps are coming from, what kind of ransomware can be hidden inside of them. If they're interfacing with anything that touches your company's infrastructure, that's just the door. And as I said, to summarize, a lot of these ransomware attacks, and people are paying for them, it just becomes R&D to get into more ransomware attacks because people are paying the ransom. And that's all I got. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to talk a little bit about finance.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patricia Maricola, and I'm from Maricola Elite Solutions, Inc. So my company, we are bookkeepers and accountants, and I've been in this field for over 14 years. So I definitely have some stories of clients getting hacked and even other accounting firms that I've known of getting hacked. So one major thing that cyber criminals target from accounting professionals and what they look for when they try to get into our systems is your name, your date of birth, your social numbers, your addresses, email addresses, any information about your spouse or your children. They try to get your income as well as health insurance information. This is a big one. So a couple of years back, which we don't have to do that anymore, we had to report everybody's health insurance, who had health insurance, who didn't. So a lot of people were hacking into accounting firms to get the information that was put on the tax return and regarding health insurance, and then going and trying to open up other health insurance plans for themselves and their families. Another big thing that they try to target is your employer's information. And then with that information, what they end up doing is then tracking down that employer and trying to hack into their system as well. And of course, all financial records they try to get into. I had an accounting firm that I knew of, and I always spoke with them. And it was a pretty small accounting firm up in Connecticut. And what ended up happening is they didn't have the proper security in place, and somebody hacked into their computer system. And what they were doing is before the return was electronically filed, they were changing the account and routing information and then submitting the return with with their own account and routing information. So if their client was supposed to receive a refund, instead of the client receiving the refund, it was going into the hacker's account. When you file a tax return and you're expecting a refund, always make sure that your account and routing number is yours before you sign off for the return to be submitted, because the IRS does not cross-reference your name or your social security number before they submit the refund to be processed into your bank account. And once that happens, then you have to fight with the bank, not the IRS, to try to get your money back. So the IRS kind of washes their hands once they send out the money. And that's hard when that happens, from an accountant's point of view, because you're trying to explain to the client that for us to get back your money, we have to argue with the banks, and it ends up getting very messy. Next slide, please. So some ways that we make sure that we stay secure is, my password requirements are very invasive, and we have to make sure that we have everything that we need for the password. And I also urge my employees to have a multi-factor authentication. That always does help. So that way, if somebody does get your password or is able to figure out your password, at least you'd have to get a code from either your cell phone or your email. Role-based action control. So that means you have to be limited with who you give what information to. So your staff members, of course, you want to try to give them as much information as possible, but sometimes it's better not to give them all of the information if they don't need it. If you leave more information laying around, it's easier for a hacker to get that information. We always file encrypt, so before we send anything out to a client that is sensitive, that may have all the information that a hacker would want, we make sure to have those emails encrypted, so that way if it gets lost out there in cyberspace, nobody can get it. We regularly run scanning on our computer, and we go through our logs. Now, you have to always have a plan in case something does happen. Now, the IRS has a publication. If you could go to the next slide, please. They have a publication out there for accountants that we have to follow. So we have to make sure that we have our, T's crossed and our I's dotted, and we have to make sure that we have all the proper information in place in case something does happen. So as an accountant, we need to have a backup plan. Now, some ways that you could also tell, that I tell my clients, the ways that they could protect themselves is to make sure that their emails are secure and that they don't just freely give out their usernames and passwords. You have to make sure that you monitor all of your bank statements, credit card statements, even if it might look like a minor charge that you're not sure what it's for, even if it's $5, you need to look into it, because that's kind of where it begins. Make sure that you safeguard your social security number and never leave anything out in plain sight that might end up having you getting hacked. another big way to make sure that you have everything in place is hiring a company. And the perfect example is IMSM, and Nerio could tell you a little bit more about what he can do to help you.
All right. Well, thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Marty, for some of that insight. And with that, let's dive into what we can do, what can be done about some of these situations, preventing them even rather. So look, understandably, this is a big step for companies to take. It's not easy, and that's why we have incredibly experienced and qualified assessors to help you implement these systems and make sure that you pass the certification process. Okay. And another in 27001, essentially, when you look at this, it's just there to create a backbone for a strong security protocol system. And what this is going to do is show potential customers, business partners, and other stakeholders that you have a system in place to mitigate the risk of data exposure. So, and this opens doors in different markets for you, especially if you're looking to do business internationally. Or with larger Fortune 500 clients, let's say. So this is just, focusing. This is really the main focus is really risk prevention. The money saved on financial penalties and insurance claims alone more than make up for the investment in implementing a security system. These are just some examples where we overlap with regulatory requirements. And this is true of other ISO standards as well that help you make sure you're conforming to other standards as well, internationally and within the United States. Piggybacking on 27001, there's just some additional guidelines to consider. And besides this, I will also in the future be discussing other standards separate from 27001, which complement the company's overall quality and risk mitigation. For example, like ISO 9001, which we'll talk about in the future. And with that, I want to say thank you. I think we've gone on for long enough. So I'd like to open it up to the floor, to the audience. If there are any questions, please go right ahead. You can enter in the chat. And you know what? While we wait for that, let's actually go ahead and answer a question that was sent in prior to the webinar. And this is actually one that comes up quite a bit. Like, hey, right now we have a question that they're currently undergoing SOC 2 certification, and they want to know what the difference is between SOC 2 and ISO 27001. And that's a good question. You could kind of say that they're cousins, but the main difference between SOC 2 and 27001 is that SOC 2 is going to mostly be focused on proving security controls that protect customer data that have been implemented, whereas 27001 also wants you to prove that you have an operational information security management system in place to manage your info security program on an ongoing basis. So it adds several controls around proving the management system is in place, regularly reviewed, and it conforms to the standard. And that's really it in a nutshell. All right. And if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and end it there. I want to thank Marty and Patricia again. Thank you so much. That was some really interesting information. And this is recorded again. It will be made available, and we will send out an email with our contact information should you want to learn more about this standard or any other ones. Thank you again, and everybody enjoy your day. Take care. Bye.